The Blue Things and the Boy Who Saw Them. Sky, water, underground, blind, low, shake. And one more that comes to mind, Dr. Birch. I think it's fear. The most interesting boy I ever met was only 6 years old. His name was Charles Duncan. Charles was one of my patients. One of many, it seemed, but looking back on it, there was no one like Charles. He was one of a kind, a brilliant mind, like a calculator in many regards. He processed mathematics equations better than anyone I knew in college, and spoke more eloquently than any 6-year-old in the state. His memory was exact, almost photographic. He was calm, reasonable, intelligent, likable, polite. Much unlike, of course, the average child at that age, whose hyperactivity is generally impossible to control, and who drives his mother up the walls day and night. Charles was a synesthete, and his brain saw color in just about everything. His alphabet, numbers, and tastes were color-coded. He once described music as a light show, how each note flashed a vibrant color. Charles was unique. This is perhaps why it depressed me to know what a hard life the young boy had endured. Charles came from a history of substance abuse, not the child specifically, but the immediate family. His home life was much disturbed, I think, to say the least. A drunk as a father, and a mother whose tormented past made her negligent toward her son. There were days when I had Charles lying on his back, practicing free interpretation to see what sorts of terms his unconscious conjured up. Night, dark, deep, rot, damp, under, bottle, below, blue, blueberry. He paused, studying the popcorned texture of the ceiling. I've got one, Dr. Birch, on the tip of my tongue. It's blue, I know it is. That's okay, Charles, I said, jotting the terms. Take your time. Depress. What does it mean? I wrote the word beside the others. What do you think it means, Charles? I'm not sure. My mother uses that one a lot. That's why it comes to mind. Depressed. Depression is a term we often use to describe extreme sadness, severe, sometimes associated with emptiness or anxiety. Charles nodded. My mother is sad. I can feel it all the time. You do possess something of a pattern here, Charles, I said, eyeing him over my glasses. There was a lot of black and blue, and something deep, possibly underground, or underwater. Does that ring a bell? No? What about the colors, black and blue? You see them often? I see them everywhere, Dr. Birch. I won't lie. Speaking to Charles for several weeks in succession was starting to get to me. Trying to figure him out made me depressed. Each time I felt we were on the verge of some discovery, he would turn to me and say, No, not that, Dr. Birch. It's something else. The first time Charles mentioned the blue things was 3 months into our hour-long sessions together. In retrospect, I'm astonished he had never mentioned them before then. What about your dreams, Charles? Have the nightmares gone away? A little, but I still have them 1 or 2 times a week. I dream about the blue things a lot. Blue things? I see them in my dreams from time to time, but they're everywhere at home. I scribbled a note on my clipboard. Blue things in dreams? At home? Charles, I said, frowning. He looked over at me. Describe these blue things to me. Oh gosh, Dr. Birch, you mean you've never seen one before? I shook my head slowly. They're everywhere, all over everything, like bats but lots uglier. Describe them to me, as you would, say, to a person who has never seen a tree before. Charles was on his back and now shut his eyes tight, thinking hard. The cogs turned through cobwebs. Where to begin, Dr. Birch? They're blue, deep blue all over, and they look like bats. They've got bat wings and fur and really long, sharp fangs. But instead of ears, they've got long antennas, and instead of two normal eyes, they have one big red one. I watched Charles to see if he might start laughing. He didn't. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, my mind suddenly reeling with what it could mean. "And these blue things," I said to him, "do they tell you anything? To do bad things, perhaps? To hurt people?" Charles shook his head. "No, sir, they don't talk to me. In fact, I don't think they can talk. They just bite people. Really hard sometimes. Looks like it hurts." I chewed my tongue, nodded, suddenly aware that I had stopped writing. I penned a quick description of the blue things and how they bite people. "When did you start seeing the blue things, Charles? Just how long ago?" Charles was sitting up now, but he wasn't looking at me. He was looking straight forward, into space. "Years ago, it has to be, for as long as I can remember. And they're not around all the time, only sometimes, when things go bad." "When things go bad?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Like when Father beat Mother with his fist about 2 years ago. There were lots of blue things. Father was drunk and loud and he was yelling, that's right, because Mother didn't make dinner, and she told him to get lost because he was drunk. Then he hit Mother over and over again, and I thought he might kill her. That was the worst it's ever been. But that night Father got into his car and drove off, and Mother never went to bed because she was sitting in the armchair in the living room, all bruised and stuff. But the blue things were all over her, biting her, flocking and flapping, like birds." We sat in silence for an interminable amount of time, long before I realized I had not responded. So these blue things hurt your mother?" "They were biting her, but I don't think she felt it. She acted like she didn't care. Didn't notice them at all." "And your father? The blue things didn't attack him?" "A few did, but he didn't care either. He didn't do anything about it." I stared down at my notes, wondering where to begin. The blue things were metaphorical. They must have been. Either that or Charles was exhibiting positive symptoms of schizophrenia. Delusions, hallucinations. But Charles never struck me as that type. He was bright. His mind was young and healthy. I went along with it. "That was the first time I remember seeing them," Charles went on, still staring at nothing. "Father came back the next day. I remember a lot of crying. It seemed they made up. And that day the blue things were gone." "And you've seen them since?" I asked in a hoarse voice, my mouth dry as sandpaper. "Tell me about the other times." "My Aunt Marie was in a car accident last year," said Charles. "There were blue things then, too, all over her, in the hospital room. And when Mother found out, the blue things swarmed to her, too. They were biting her neck and her arms, sucking something out of her. I thought they were going to eat her up until there was nothing left. But Aunt Marie recovered pretty fast, and the blue things started to go away after a few weeks. One by one they flew off. I don't know where they went. I don't want to." He paused. I waited, no longer trying to write. I just watched him. "Aunt Marie was really sad after the car accident. She said the person in the other car might never walk again, and Aunt Marie felt like it was all her fault. The blue things were all over her, and those ones never went away. Not until the end." "The end?" I pressed. "Your Aunt Marie passed away?" "She killed herself. But by the time it got to that point, there were so many blue things all over her that I couldn't see her anymore. I think they were fighting to get to her skin. Some of them circled around her trying to get in, but those ones just starved to death. Aunt Marie's house had lots of dead blue things in it. So many wanted to be on her all at once that there wasn't enough of Aunt Marie to go around. Mother and I went to check on Aunt Marie one day, but she had hanged herself in the basement. And all the blue things that had been feeding on her were dead on the ground." Slowly, I stood and went over to my desk drawer, then fished out a box of Crayolas that had once belonged to my daughter. My own daughter had been barely older than Charles before she died of leukemia. I had a moment, One of those moments where your throat chokes up. Then faced Charles. I handed him the crayons and a blank sheet of paper. What's this for, Dr. Birch? I want you to draw a blue thing for me. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just do the best you can. Charles went to work. I saw him pull the blue crayon from the box and put it to the paper. I've seen the blue things recently as well, Charles said. Mother and Father argue a lot. There's lots of blue things after that. And the first night I heard Mother use that word, depressed, there were blue things all over her. So many I couldn't see her face. And what about you? I said quietly, watching him draw. Why haven't the blue things attacked you yet? Well, that's just it, Dr. Birch. I've been trying to keep them away. I think I can do it with my thoughts. Please, explain. Well, I figured something out recently. The blue things like bad thoughts. I think they feed off of them. Like parasites? Like parasites, Dr. Birch. And I tried to keep the bad thoughts out for as long as I could. I was able to stay away from them for a long time. And you failed? After a while, yes. There was one night I couldn't keep the bad thoughts away. I was in my room, and I could hear the shouting downstairs. I felt sadness in my chest. And then the blue things came for me. I tried to run. I got out of the house and down the street a little ways before they started to bite me, and I felt it. I was afraid, and then I remembered that I couldn't be afraid because that would make them want me more. So I stopped thinking about how bad things were. Stopped thinking about Mother and Father and the blue things, and the blue things went away, off into the sky. I leaned back in my chair, thoroughly convinced of Charles' belief. Charles really did believe he was seeing these blue things. These emotional parasites. They could have been hallucinations, but the way Charles spoke of them told me they were not. That's quite the story, Charles. It is. So these creatures are fairly common, I take it? Yes, sir. They infest hospitals and public places like subways. There's millions in New York. We took a vacation there last summer. Most people have at least one or two. The little boy held up the drawing for me to see. Charles was no artist, but the depiction was clear. A blue bat with antennas and one angry-looking red eye. He had used the black crayon to indicate large spikes from the mouth, like fangs. A long, wispy tail descended from the creature. He had drawn stick figures of what was clearly his mother, and a man that was clearly his father, both of which were covered in blue scribbles. There was a third figure, too. One wearing glasses and a bow tie. He was also covered from head to toe in blue squiggles. Who's he? I asked, pointing to the figure. That's you, Dr. Birch, said Charles. The blue things are all over you.